My name is Brad Damon. I'm going to take you through some multiplanar movements for the knee and hip joint, lumbar spine, shoulder girdle, and the shoulder joint. I'll start with the knee joint. So we have flexion, extension of the knee joint that occurs on the sagittal plane. We also have internal and external rotation of the knee joint. So internal toward the midline of the body, external away from the midline. Internal rotation, external rotation. That occurs on the sagittal plane. For the hip joint, we have flexion, extension, hyperextension of the hip joint. Flexion, extension, hyperextension. That occurs on the sagittal plane. We have internal and external rotation. Internal toward the midline of the body, external away. Internal rotation, external rotation. That occurs on the transverse plane. And we have abduction and adduction. So abduction away from the midline of the body, adduction toward the midline of the body. Abduction, adduction. And that occurs on the frontal plane. For the lumbar spine, we have flexion of the lumbar spine, extension, flexion, extension. That occurs on the sagittal plane. We have lateral flexion, side to side. This occurs on the frontal plane. And rotation of the lumbar spine, which occurs on the transverse plane. For the shoulder girdle, we have elevation, depression, elevation, depression. That occurs on the frontal plane. We have abduction and adduction. So in adduction, we're bringing the shoulders together, the shoulder blades, and in abduction, spreading them apart. So adduction, bringing them together, abduction, spreading them apart, abduction, abduction. And lastly, for the shoulder girdle, we have upward and downward rotation. So upward rotation, downward rotation, upward, downward rotation. That occurs on the frontal plane. For the shoulder joint, we have flexion, extension, flexion, extension. That occurs on the sagittal plane. We have internal and external rotation on the transverse plane. Internal rotation, external rotation, internal, external. On the transverse plane, we have abduction and adduction on the frontal plane. So we have abduction away from the midline of the body, adduction towards the midline, abduction, adduction on the frontal plane. We also have abduction and adduction on the horizontal plane. So we have adduction toward the midline and abduction away from the midline. Toward the midline and abduction away from the midline.